Alrighty, what's going on, Micropod peeps? I am super excited. Today, we have an amazing guest, Dasha, who is a gut health expert recommended to us by Alan Aragon, who I've been going to class with. We've had him on the podcast as well by the time this goes on. But Dasha, she is an amazing coach, a consummate, gut health expert with thousands plus of, success stories. And today really wanted to just pick her brain on what to do in terms of gut health expertise as a coach for the audience who may be dealing with gut health issues, what the right tests are, just because there's so many coming up online, and maybe just like what the future of gut health looks like. Dasha, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and gracing us with your time. I know you're really busy, but you mind just giving us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this space, and we'll just kind of roll into the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's going to be a good one. What got me started? Well, like many, I went to school, thought I was going to be a doctor, thought I wanted to go down that route. My major was in biology, so I was doing tons of research, trying to get in, boost up my resume. I had done facial reconstructive internships, malaria, blood work, mice, like community internships. Like when it comes to research, I went all in. I wanted all the experience I could in all the different areas that I could get my hands on. And as I became more familiar with both the research side of things and also become a doctor, I realized neither was really for me. Research was too quiet, and being a doctor, it's kind of more of that pill approach that I wasn't necessarily agreeing with. So I became a registered dietitian. I figured if I could become a registered dietitian, I could have the best of both worlds, where I could integrate and bridge the gap between patients and society, and I could kind of act as a liaison between preventative dietary lifestyle habits. In college, I stopped dancing of 12 years at that time, so I got into bodybuilding as like my fitness outlet. And as a result, I kind of had these two synergies at once, where I was really into biochemistry and optimizing what we eat, but also how we train. Because I was in college, I was like, okay, I have like one area that I can get my meals in, and I can get one like 30-minute workout in. Like, what is the most effective thing that I could be eating and exercising to do this properly and be really smart about it? So that's the research that I started getting really far into. While I was completing my master's at Tufts, I was the first student who asked to write a dissertation with her master's. Usually that's for PhD students, but I really wanted to dive into one specific topic. So I chose fiber. And my thesis was uncovering the modern and historic discrepancies in the paleo diet. So I went deep. I understood, where did that research actually come from, which, by the way, it's all a sham. It's all, yeah, it's really bad.
Here we go.
Yeah, it's really bad. But it made me really love and appreciate fiber and understand that, at the end of the day, fiber is the key to everything, really. And as I began exploring gut health and fiber, and, I started getting pulled into consulting work. So Dr. William Lee, I helped write his New York Times bestselling books. On the back end, if you read on the inside, it says my acknowledgments on it. And then on the consulting side, I was focusing, instead of eat to beat disease, I was focusing on like the morphology of the human body and how we've changed from the Paleolithic era to where we are now, or the Neanderthal, and figuring out how like the lengths of our stomach has changed, the size of our brains has changed, and how that actually had to do with specific agricultural standpoints, or, we learned fire, what happened to our bodies because of that over time. And same thing with like the industrial era, that people now think that is like the culprit of everything. So anyways, all this is to say, I'm a huge nerd and I love exercise, diet, lifestyle practices, and really making gut health easy to understand.
We're in the right spot. We're in the right. Marcos and I the same way. Marcos and I the same way.
Oh, yeah. I became super passionate about it because as I was getting my master's degree, I got diagnosed with celiac disease. So I was going through my own gut struggles, and that obviously like pinpointed me a little bit further into all of that.
Usually become the expert in the pain you're dealing with, and that's an amazing story.
That sounds like an NCI thing.
Yeah,
You always say that. I feel like.
What's my excuse then?
You're, I don't know. I don't know, Marcos. What is your? I don't know. You just really like the intensity of exercise. I don't know.
No, well, maybe, I don't know. But so Dasha, the gut health, the gut. I mean, I feel like it's gained a lot of attention probably in the last decade. Whether we're talking about quote unquote leaky gut, as it was so coined early on, only to then be known as what intestinal permeability. And then, I mean, again, where do we want to take today's conversation? Because I feel like there's always so many things that people question about it. Hell, I made a post today that was like indirectly related to gut health because it was me talking about Coke Zero and aspartame, and then I'm like, is this healthy or not? And people legit, or let's pull up the stats really quick.
Yeah.
I think at the time, half of the people that actually saw my story on Instagram actually voted, which is insane. And it was 110 people that voted yes or no on this.
Nothing like Coke Zero to get the people to vote.
Juice is flowing. So as of right now, it's 118 votes, 65 for healthy, 53 for bad. And okay, my wife's like, yeah, moderation, Marcos. You're having like one a day. I'm like, well, maybe I do that on occasion, but again, I don't know, but necessarily, is it bad? Is it really going to be influencing my gut to a place that we can even research at this stage in time, right? So where do you want to go with this? What do you want to talk about? Like,
I have a few ideas, but let Dasha go first.
Yeah.
So my whole goal, like I said, is to make gut health really easy. So at CorePerform, what we do is we teach and preach the 5 CorePerform Speed Pillars. So if you think about you want to speed up your health, just remember the word speed.
Okay.
And what that stands for is sleep, personal stress, environmental stress, exercise, and diet. Okay, so let me just go back and obviously everyone knows 7 to 9 hours of sleep. We got that one. Personal stress. You are not your kids, your work, your job, everything. You have full control over how you respond to those things. And that's what people fail to understand. They're like, oh, I'm so stressed from all these things. And listen, I hear you, but the better that you get at tackling and creating your own barrier to how you resolve that, the less internal stress your body will feel. Because whether it's a massive cut or super intense exercise, or you only slept 1 hour, or you got in a really bad fight with your husband or your wife, all of those things the body perceives as stress, no matter what it is. So when you're telling me, Marcos, that you just had a Coke Zero, how do I classify that Coke Zero's effect on your gut versus you getting in an argument with your wife right beforehand and how that impacted your gut? We haven't quantified that. And the reality is that the gut and our brain and our physiology will interpret both of those stressors to various degrees. So for someone to tell me that, Diet Coke every day is so bad for me, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great. I don't know what you're thinking and how you're even speaking to yourself every day. You could be so angry and all of these things and harboring, and you don't have community and you don't have, something to look forward to. You have no happiness, and that could be impacting your health more than the Coke Zero ever would. And so to really put that into perspective, I think those 5 speed pillars is great to just like lean back on. And it's like, look, Coke Zero or not, where am I in those 5 pillars? Where do I have room for improvement? And can I make a goal this 1 week to focus on one thing that will improve one of those pillars? So if sleep has been trash for me, great. I'm going to really focus this week on this one habit, which is, unplugging 2 hours before I go to bed. Every single night this week, I'm just going to focus on that one thing. And then you slowly habit stack towards optimizing all 5 speed pillars, which is never going to happen. You're never going to be perfect. I can guarantee you. I've been doing this for years and years, but that's the opportunity, right? That's where you get growth and you can become better and better.
Yeah, the argument beforehand. That's funny you actually mentioned that because there was a slight argument.
She's like, there was an argument because it's like people voted.
Well, yeah, right.
Get off your phone. We're having lunch.
Yeah. I mean, she's like, do you really need that? And I'm like, I mean, I don't need it. You're right. I don't need it. But again, do I,
Anything.
yeah, like, do I want it? For sure. Does it allow for maybe, again, to me, it's like, well, am I going to go jonesing for the extra calories from like something that's sugar laden afterwards, or is this going to kind of keep me at bay? And usually, I was like, well, if I have this kind of the bookend the meal, maybe I'll feel better about it. And I didn't go have something else afterwards. And I know for other people, it could be a trigger. So, but then again, like, I'm not trying to justify my thing to her. I'm just like, what does it matter? And it's like, oh, don't you think it's a little excessive? I'm like, well, don't you think drinking coffee every day is excessive? That, and doing it as a latte with oat milk, which again, we could argue there's canola oil or other seed oils in there. And again, like, I'm like, everybody's view of health looks a little bit different. So
Yeah.
it was just interesting. It was interesting that it led to, like, my wife woke up this morning. She's like, you posting that and then me making a comment on your thing. Like, I've never been like so blown up in my DMs about like something else. Like, and I'm like, well, and why is this controversial? Like, again, like, I'm not here to argue. I didn't even say like how I view it. I was just like laughing at these things. And so you're right. Like the speed pillars, as you talk about it, like we have kind of our 5 pillars here, like on the podcast as well, and things that we talk about with our particular coaching as well. Right. The framework of things that all, again, like, you can't be an expert at all those things all at once. It's impossible. Like, there's give and takes in every category, but your goal should be, like you just said, sleep is 7 to 9, right? Did that end up going well? Your personal stress, like, again, are you doing your best to minimize that or mitigate certain things, or are you a breathwork person, or are you a meditator? It's interesting because, like you said, like the brain influencing the gut brain, what is it, the GBA, like the axis between the two, right, it's fascinating. And I think, again, it's cool to see that there's like people researching things that can help bring that to life. And yeah,
This is a little bit of a tangent, but what's your favorite meditation app?
I don't have one. I don't meditate.
Oh, okay.
I do something different. I do priming. So I use I'm like a proponent of like Tony Robbins. I do some Tony Robbins priming daily.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you? Do you talk about that a lot on your podcast?
I brought it up, but it's breath work, then it's gratitude, then it's visualization, and then it's giving gratitude to
Someone
people.
else.
Yeah.
Love that.
Or sending that energy to them. I also do it with cold exposure in the morning. I just like, you talk about habit stacking. So that's just how I prime. It's like a 15 thing in the morning. But if I were to meditate, I used to use the Calm app. That was pretty good. I've done some TM, but just primarily priming. I need like an active thing for me.
And I don't, since it's not something I seek, I don't actually like usually request it of the people I work with. And again, is it maybe a shortcoming of like my coaching? Yeah, potentially. But it's not that I don't bring that up into conversation about like, hey, like, studies do show, like, if you do maybe box breathing or some sort of breath work before you actually eat your meal, you've lowered your cortisol a little bit, and you're actually more receptive to the food you're about to eat. And, you might have an easier time with actually like feeling more full or what, like, so it's not that I turn a blind eye to it. It's just that, like, in practice for me, it's not something that I inherently gain value from. So it's okay.
One book I actually really liked, which I don't know why I brought this up. Sometimes I like to ask you guys questions to get even more value and get chunks out of the podcast for everyone.
Yo, this is what we like. We need some banter,
Yeah, I really liked so Sam Harris has a Waking Up app, and I'm obsessed with his voice. Like every day he gives a 10-minute app, and y'all, over the years I've done so many meditation apps, tried like all the latest things. But I keep going back to his voice. I don't know what it is about it.
Very soft spoken.
Yes. And his book is actually really great. If someone is looking to get into meditation, or they need to start understanding the science behind things, like the rational side of things, I'm very much like that. Like, unless you show me the studies and the literature, I'm really not going to do much. And unfortunately, we live in a time where everything on the New York Times bestselling list, like, you really can't trust that either, because everything's cherry picked all the data. But I really did like that one. If someone needs help starting to meditate, I would read that book, or Audible and listen to it on the
phone. No, that makes sense. The meditation stuff is powerful, I think, there. bringing it back to the gut, which is kind of, that gut brain barrier or the gut brain axis.
Mhm.
Primarily part of the conversation I wanted to bring up today too was gut health. I think that's like the big topic right nowadays. And the reason I was like wondering is I was like, how do I know as a coach and even just as a person that is using this stuff, there's so many tests coming online now. And for example, I was like at what's that guy's name? What is it? Brian Johnson's Don't Die Summit like 2 weeks ago. There was this thing called like biome. They do the microbiome and then the mycobiome, so the
Mhm.
fungi. And then another vendor came up to me and they're like, hey, here's a free test. They're called biomes. They're from Germany. And then there's Viome. And then people are like, there was a data infringement with that company, so we're not using them. Dasha, when it comes to you, when you look at like gut testing for the consumer end, what should a consumer look for that's like a really good test? My fiance, she's a clinical dietitian as well. She talks about like gut mapping and different
Yeah.
things. Yeah, GI mapping. So yeah, what are like the thresholds of like testing that are like, okay, this is the golden standard in like what you should do. But this is some other ones that you can kind of trickle down to if you don't have the finances for that, the Dutch test or whatever. Maybe we could kind of go over those a little bit and just kind of see some of the thresholds on that.
Yeah, and the reality is, unfortunately, that a lot of those ones online are literally putting money down the drain. And the reason being is because they will tell you something. If you were to hop on a call with me and you were like, Dasha, I have bloat, indigestion, acid reflux, like all these things, I'd be like, great. Sounds like your gut's pretty messed up. And we should probably focus on incorporating more whole foods, limiting saturated fats. We should increase our hydration, give them the whole spiel of the normal gut things that you would be doing. Guess what that test is going to tell them?
The
You
same
should
thing.
incorporate more fibers. You should So you're literally paying it to tell you the very bare minimum basics of healthy living.
Yeah.
And you think that it's going to tell you something like
World changing.
world changing, but a lot of those tests they store the data on the back end, and all they give you in the patient report is like, your immunity is bad, your fiber intake looks good, and you're like, okay, but as like someone who understands data, like what is the exact strain of that bacteria
Yeah,
or that
exactly.
fungi?
Yeah.
They haven't quantified it, so that's why I like
Mm.
um, GI maps or that's diagnostic solutions as tests. Or Genova is another good one. It's a little bit more expensive. The main difference between those two tests, they do the exact same thing, to be completely fair. The only benefit to Genova, but like I said, I don't really use it because it's more expensive and I don't really need to know this information, is and I also don't know how valid it is to some, well, it would make sense. But anyways, what they do on the Genova test is they also give you a percentage of reactivity
Mhm.
or sensitivity of your ability. So like they'll put like oregano, ursi, they'll put specific herbs on those strains and they'll tell
Yeah.
you how responsive you are to that specific herb. So you have a higher likelihood of choosing an herb that you'll actually respond to and kill off the bacteria with or the fungi with that is in
Mm-hmm.
your body. But like I said, it's a little bit more pricey, and the reality is I think you're fine either way. You don't really need that
Okay.
on it.
Okay. So the tests and the vendors that we're getting, I'm just throwing money away at just to tell me the same things I probably know as a consumer.
I mean, have you looked at the reports, the sample reports or anything?
I have looked at the sample reports and it's interesting. So they talk about like certain strains of like that biome company, BIOHM. The difference between them apparently was like there's microbacteria and then there's one that's the fungus. And I was like, okay, that's a little bit different. But that doesn't really tell me about the epithelium tissue or like the actual what's going on with that. Um, and it was just giving out strains and it made the same kind of things that like I would do as a coach. Hey, increase some fiber. If you can handle some fermented foods, let's go ahead and have some fermented foods. Like chia seeds are like the game changer for me. I keep telling Marcos this. I'm like, I should put it in my water. But
Yeah.
like these little tips and tricks that are like, oh yeah, and it makes sense if you can handle it. If there's certain bloat, like, yeah, maybe you're bloating a little bit because it's just a little bit more fiber than you're used to, or some vegetables. Maybe you have to look at like low FODMAP type of foods for you. And I
Or
feel
you
like,
have overgrowth and fermented food is actually making you feel worse. And so
yeah,
that's why I get into like knowing the exact strains is so, so important. And
yeah,
also a lot of times you mentioned a great point about the inflammatory markers is like that's something you could relay to your doctor. If I get a GI map back and I see high calprotectin, for example, which is an inflammatory marker and risk marker as a differentiator between IBS and IBD, and I see that someone is falling into that IBD route,
yeah.
immediate referral to a doctor. And I may
What marker again? Can you say that one more time?
calprotectin.
Oh, do we have that on our labs, Marcos?
No, it's probably more of a GI mapping
It's a
test.
it's a
Okay.
fecal
Yeah.
Okay,
fecal,
gotcha.
yeah. But the problem with a lot of these tests too is the conversation that you're having with your doctor around it. Never go to your doctor and say you got a biome test. Never go to your doctor and say you got a GI map test. You're automatically disqualified. They look at you, they laugh, they're like, haha, whatever, and they keep going. You need to bring to them a validated test marker that they will actually appreciate. So
Mm,
calprotectin is one of those markers where they're like, oh, you got your calprotectin level measured and it was elevated. Wow, I'm actually going to consider this as a viable next step for you. So you just
oh,
have to be really educated on how you phrase it to your doctor because there's certain like um, Sec IgA is one you might be able to get away with, but usually in they test it via your blood versus the stool. Calprotectin is like tried and true via the stool. You can say H. pylori stool test,
yeah.
although the gold marker would be a breath test. Whenever you think about what the gold standard is, you just want to know where in the GI the test, like where the bacteria is located that you're testing for. So H. pylori lives in the stomach. So for those of you who don't know, the from mouth to anus, it goes mouth, esophagus, stomach,
Yeah.
small intestine, large intestine, anus. So if it's at the top of the GI, so the esophagus and the stomach and the small intestine, you need it to come from the top. So you need it to be a breath test.
Hmm.
If it is something in your stool, that's going to be your large intestine.
Mm.
So when they say, like, I got an H. pylori stool test, I'm like, great, but
Mm.
it's actually located up in your stomach.
Oh, wow. See, this is why we need Dasha on, because I'm like over here like, I didn't even know this. I didn't even
Well,
know this, and like docs don't even want to talk about it like you're talking about until you get that threshold of testing. So it's like,
it's not really in our it's in our scope to be privy to it, but it's not in our scope to be able to kind of like lead to a diagnostic, you know what I mean? And even with some of the like integrative health practitioner certs that break down these different tests that they provide to like kind of look at whether it's stool, blood, urine,
Mm-hmm.
swab, whatever. Like again, like I'm not one, it's an expensive test. So a lot of people, I'm like, I'm not gonna go there day one. I'm like, hey, yes,
Never.
yeah, like, but like that's almost like how a lot of their practice kind of works in a sense. You know, it's like, here, like here's the big five, right? And then you can get so much information, and I get it. Like I know what you're saying, Dasha, too. It's like these things kind of give you a very generalized, like, hey, we got to go into this like kind of diet, a little more restrictive diet, more whole foods, veggies, those things. And some people need that data. So it's like if that person is like, I want to buy this thing immediately, like you kind of sell them on that. So that, like, you know, it gives them that buy-in. But, you know, ultimately for us, Seamus, like, again, like how many times have you actually used, you know, a stool test with somebody to like figure out if they're dealing with a true like gut dysbiosis
no.
issue?
I'm like, just give me your food log.
Yeah.
Like one of my clients today was like, oh, I'm having some issues. Like I'm up weight. And I'm like, well, let's look at your food log and let's look at nutrient timing. I'm like,
Yeah.
there you go. You ate late and you're up weight today. Like
Yeah.
we don't need like a crazy food log, or like someone was having like some bloat, and then I looked at her food log. I'm like, yeah, you're having a lot of fiber. Like that was like a goal for you, but you're having a lot of fiber. She's like, is it the gluten? I'm like, I don't see anything here that was messing with you. And are you celiac? Like, do you have a gluten intolerance or something like that? And like, no, I think it's just the fiber. You're having a lot of fibrous
People
foods.
forget that fiber is quite literally non-digestible carbohydrate. And then they wonder why they bloat from it. I'm like, you just ate a non-digestible food item.
That's why I don't mess with fiber. I'm nothing but white rice and meat, that's like.
No, that's so
You're talking to the fiber study research specialist here.
Fiber is life in moderation.
I get enough fiber. There's trace amounts of fiber in the stuff that I eat. I try to mitigate certain levels of bloating personally, and the vegetables that I include might be lower gas vegetables. Typically, if I do include them in a meal, I can go by without them being there. And then I like having some fruit that obviously has fiber. So it's like, I'm going to preferentially choose those. But again, like knowing your body and your response to things, like that's kind of what you're mentioning here, right? Like if you go to this diet and you can isolate like single food elements and that disrupts you, then you probably should stay clear of it because your body may not like it, or it's a little more gassy for you. And I think everybody's gut biome is a little different, right? Like you mentioned celiac for yourself, right? So gluten's kind of off the table for the most part. And even soy sauce, right? Like you have to get like gluten-free soy sauce, which they do make, right? And then I'm just going to use the vertical diet as kind of like what I'm talking about in this context, because he talks about kind of, the omission of like garlic and onions, but like I love cooking with garlic and onions, and they don't seem to be bad for me. Like, and it adds so much aromatic and flavor to what I do. But like, if I was just purely being, a truist into that like diet, then I would not include that whatsoever. So it's like, again, like you also just said in the beginning of this, like paleo kind of was talked about to be a little bit on the bullshit side, and that kind of perked my ears up. It's like, well, why? Like, I mean, is it like are you referring to the fact that like, I mean, I think we all agree here that paleo as a core kind of diet in a sense, like it's a great suggestion to get people started to actually focus on whole foods.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the paleo diet. I think it's great. Incorporate more whole foods, period. Duh.
Yeah.
Like, who would be anti that? The only thing that is actually the flagging of it was how they created it and like measured it from the get-go. So I think some of the earliest studies of the paleo diet, to start with, the way that they actually collected the data was anthropologists went in. Anthropologists they have no idea. They've never took a nutrition class in their life. These people are there in the tribes of the Hadza, and they're looking in and basically trying to see like how they live, the mapping. While they were there, they said, oh, this guy seemed to go fishing 1 time a day, and they'd put like a 1 asterisk. And then they'd say, well, he looks like he has something else. I'm going to put a 2 there. Seems like he seems to forage on a 2 basis. From those numbers, they then created and extrapolated a nutrition meal plan from these people, from that quantification of the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. And then they basically said, oh, seems like this person's eating 113 grams of fiber in a day. And you're like, what? Like, wait, what? And so then that's when you start to question how it was actually created. Now, obviously, it doesn't really matter how it was created. Like, we all agree, it's a great diet to start to follow. It doesn't really matter that it was founded on unreally true evidence or data.
Yeah.
But it's just funny to kind of put into perspective.
Yeah. And I think that like appeal to like nature, appeal to like era, I guess, right? Like Paleolithic era, right? Like it's like, well, logically, yeah, like these are the things that people were eating in that period of time, and seemingly they were hunting down big game. So probably makes sense for us to do that. But then if you look at it from, I guess,
Does it?
I don't know. I'm not like, does it, what do you mean?
Does it? Please, let's put it this way. Imagine they just learned to cook food with fire, and they looked back, and at that time they were like, you know what? We never used fire before. Screw fire. Screw fire. Let's eat everything raw again. And meanwhile, if they had like fire was what unlocked our ability to grow our brain size like 10x, grow from like a perspective of human physiology so much. So to sit there and be like, No, we didn't used to do that. That makes no sense. Let's never do that again. It doesn't make sense, that argument, right?
Oh yeah,
The rock carnivores Dasha, are going to be melting on this one today.
the raw carnivore people. Oh, and I think like if you look into, we'll just use like precision nutrition's approach of like, what do a lot of these things agree upon? I think that infographic is like permanently ingrained in my head. It's like there is little bits and pieces of everything that all these types of, we'll call them quote unquote healthy diets include. And if you stick to that probably 80-90% of the time, and you have a little tie to modernity every now and again, like you're going to be in a good spot. And I think, again, Seamus mentioned going to the Don't Die Summit. Like, I think some people have just become so overly, like, I don't know, like enamored.
Quantified,
Enamored by this
optimized,
like
enamored.
data,
They need
and this, again, another thing that's not
data.
really rooted in science is these telomeres and saying that this is your biological versus your chronological age. Like, again, like, says who? Like, okay, cool. This is the guys. We're 20 years old on paper. It's like, all right, well, like, what do you do? Like, do you want to go back to being 20? Were you like billions of dollars richer at 20 years old? Like, I don't get it personally.
And that's why I think testing, right now, a lot of it, some of it's tried and true for sure. But some of it's just fun. It's like 23andMe, fun. Genetics testing, fun. This is where I came from, fun. But it's not going to be valuable to your health. And I think a lot of it has to do actually with the psychology of why we buy, which as a consumer, it's very important for everyone who's listening right now to hear this. Companies who push testing do so that they can sell you a service on the back end, because they can prove to you that you are broken and they can then sell you a service to fix it. They sell you a problem and a solution. The problem with
Dasha is a modern day philosopher, guys. She's not a dietitian. She's a modern day philosopher, dog.
I'm a business owner and I see it all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, honestly, the ads that convert the best are the ones that are offering free tests. Why?
Yeah.
Because people are desperate. They're desperate to understand, why am I broken? Why do I feel this way? This test must be able to solve my answers and tell me. Great, it did. And it told you that you're broken. And now what are you going to do? Now you're going to start feeling, right? Now you're going to do something about it? Or are you just going to be stuck in that cycle of feeling desperate and feeling like you need to buy the tests? And that's why those functional medicine doctors, I don't like them either, because the first initial consult that you have with them, they sell you 5 tests. And they tell you, oh, you have this parasite and this heavy metal toxicity, and you have all these problems, and you leave and you're like, crap, like I really am broken, huh?
Well,
on point.
I mean,
on point.
Yeah, like you'd mentioned early on, like almost like the fear mongering nature of like getting these labs done to then lead to something. It kind of sucks but like, again, like I don't disagree that might be the thing that like, oh my God, like I need to actually make a change, and like buying this test helped inform me, because they were like maybe turning a blind eye to it. So like kind of have like maybe a little bit of that like kind of indifference feel. But I don't, again, like how did you get into like health and fitness and nutrition and gut again? Like what was the, like what led you to here?
Being diagnosed with celiac disease. Like I agree, you do need the testing. Like you need the testing. Also, had someone just taken the time to sit with me and evaluate my diet and lifestyle way, way earlier, I probably would have gotten a diagnosis and changed my life a lot faster than had I just kept going with the
Well, let me ask you this.
Did you feel like something was wrong for like a extended period of time and you couldn't place your finger on it, out of curiosity?
And then, and then the follow up on that too, Dasha, is like, do you think you had access to those type of people that had that knowledge base or were willing to give it? Or like, did our education system, did the systems for you at the time in your local area have that capacity to do that for you?
No. The way that I went about it and what I see day to day now is that people are going to their doctor's office and they're paying the insurance way. The problem with the insurance way is there's a tried and true script and methodology of how you go through in order to get that testing or the medication from insurance. Like that's just the scripts, right? Like we bill insurance a certain ways. And I learned all this through when you become a practitioner, you learn how to code with billing systems.
Yeah.
The problem is that, you have to go through blood work first, then you go through an endoscopy, then you go through a colonoscopy. That is the 1, 2, 3 when you have stomach
Is
issues.
that the threshold from the doctor? Like, you can't just go to endoscopy before you do the blood work. That you got to go blood work, endoscopy.
And that's all with a gastroenterologist. Like, it has to be with a GI specific physician as well.
Usually you'll get referred to a specialist unless your primary is willing to order the test.
Got it. Okay.
But the only way that you can bypass any of those is if you're like, you have severe condition. Like if you're bleeding, you have bloody stool, or you're like throwing up blood, like obviously you're going to be placed into the endoscopy next day. If you're someone like me who is like I'm like hunched over in pain, like I had to almost call 911, like I'm like I want to go to the ER. Like if you're someone like that and they're like, well, I'll see you in 3 months, we can get you into the colonoscopy then. Not even, I think for me it was 6 months. I think it was 6 months. And by the time you get into the endoscopy in 6 months, then they're like, the results are half and half. Like, I don't know, you still have problems? I'm like, yeah, I still have problems. Great. Okay, well, we'll get you scheduled in 8 months for your next colonoscopy.
Ugh.
That's absolute trash. Yeah, that's absolute trash. So is that on the system? Like they're just so overly, I don't know, like understaffed, overly, too many people coming in, like, or is that just because they just don't have the time for you? I don't know. It's like
priorities. I mean, probably time-wise, but also priorities. Like patients with, like I said, like something gastric ulcers or something that's like a very severe, like they need ASAP, they're going to be prioritized over you.
So you were going to have 2 years of just suffering before you actually figured out Jack. And even then we didn't even know.
Yeah. Even then he comes back after the colonoscopy. He comes back and he's like, I think it's half and half. I'm like, sir, you can't give me a 50% diagnosis. I either have it or I don't.
Yo.
Well, the fact that you even have an inkling of it, wouldn't that be a cause of concern to investigate further?
So no. So celiac disease, especially if you live with it, it can manifest in very various ways. Like it's not like when I ate gluten, I didn't feel anything. Like I felt fine when I ate gluten. The problem was that outside of that, like my whole life, I was in crippling anxiety. I lost a ton of weight. I had malabsorption like crazy. I had those stomach pains that felt like someone took a knife into your stomach and just started circling in there.
Jeez.
And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't wish that feeling. I thought I was going to die. Like on my bathroom floors, I thought I was dying. And those are the pains. And then you go to your doctor and you try and explain it to him. And he's like, see you in 6 months, like for that colonoscopy. And I'm like,
gosh, dang.
Well,
so let me ask you this then. Outside of like the gut physiological stuff, like the testing and stuff like that, then you'd had to, because you said you had crippling anxiety. Mm-hmm. Did you just have to start working on your anxiety then?
Yeah, like during
stress management.
During that time, my first doctor's appointment, he was like, you just have anxiety. Here's an SSRI.
Oh,
that's another one you always get. So, I'm in college. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like maybe it is the stress of college. And so I take it and I'm a zombie. I am like this all day. And I'm like,
gosh, they gave you the playbook, Dasha. They just gave you the playbook.
Exactly. This is like and I see this time and time again. I'm like, yep. Oh, by the way, when you go in right now, they're going to give you an endoscopy and they'll probably tell you to take Linzess if it doesn't improve. And by the way, they'll also do this. And the patient will come back and they'll regurgitate the same thing. And I'm like, I know. I've like learned the playbook by now.
God,
that's
damn.
Well, we've had our fair share of talking about the medical system as it stands today versus like what our practices do, and then but also try to work in conjunction with that and knowing the ins and outs. And it's like when we did our episode with who was that, Seamus, that talked about like kind of the changing of the guard, if you will, with the National Institute of Health and all the things that are likely in the playbook of Donald Trump, effectively, right?
Oh my gosh, Good Demand. That's his podcast, but I'm blanking on
the name.
Miguel Felix.
Yeah, so we were talking about this, Sasha, and it makes us feel more valuable as like nutrition and health coaches and practitioners with our, concierge people. But then it also makes me feel bad about like people that are not getting the care that they might need, or again, like what sparked my interest of trying to do things from a nonprofit realm to like get into schools and talk to kids about these things. And I mean, I don't know if I can even make a dent when it comes to like our Clark County School District here in Las Vegas to say like, we need to figure out how to make better food for our students. But, cause then, well, then
That's where it starts.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does. And I mean, again, it might
Crazy.
it might be just one CrossFit class at a time, unfortunately, because that's like the thing that I kind of started with, to like go in and talk to these kids that are already a little more influenced.
It's always kids.
Yeah.
Tufts has the number one policy. Like they work very closely with the White House. They were the ones who revamped that White House conference that we had for the first time since 1969 on policy
Wow.
and U.S. policy around nutrition. It just happened a few years ago. So all of my professors in college were the ones who are making the USDA guidelines right now. Like they are the ones
Revamping them.
Yeah, like actually in the depths of all the research and everything. And what they always say is like, it has to be the kids. Like you have to start at the kids and educating the kids. And like we always go to all these things like Red 40 and like all these things. I'm like,
we were supposed to do a pod on that. It's so funny you say this because Desiree, my fiance, she gets into like big like meditative things, and she said like 2 weeks ago I called Marcos and she's like, oh, we gotta do, because she does like trifecta and like meal prep and stuff like that. She's like, we gotta have these meal prep companies for the kids, and then we can put them in the schools, and like she's gonna do that. And then I know that Marcos was like, some rebuttals were like, well, kids are picky eaters, or they have like all these different things, and like they like certain foods, so it's like, how do you handle that? Like, how is that scalable? And I was like, we're already thinking about these like ideas, but it's true. I think kids are the backbone of America. There's guidelines for them, and then also like culture. So like I would say one thing about kids growing up, and like I could say this because I was kind of like a latchkey kid, where is you grow up and you don't have that much parent supervision. So like, what do you use your money for? You're like, oh, let me go to the vending machine. Let me get a Coke. Let me get like, Kit Kats and stuff like that.
I use mine on the candy shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Snack Shack. I gave my son $2.
Snack Shack.
That's what it was called.
Snack Shack. It's $1. You could get like everything like with $1. But the thing is, it's like, okay, well, what are kids doing? Maybe a little bit older than kids, maybe like the middle school type kids, right? And they're talking about that time. I know that after school all-stars is like a thing that they talk about, that last few hours between school is like a really bad time where kids can do a lot of weird things. But food culture, like each culture might have different things around their food too. So it's like, yes, we're making these guidelines around food, but it's like there's different cultures with foods and how they think about food. Or if there's not much parent supervision, how are kids handling food? Are they buying things at the Snack Shack? And these are the things that come up in my head. I'm like, this is why we have a bigger problem than just like, oh, obesity is a calories in and calories out thing. I'm like, I know that's the laws of thermodynamics, but I just can't I can't put my finger on what's going on with food because it's such a dynamic concept.
When I was doing research, I did research on the Puerto Rican study, which is like we were getting stool tests, and we were like, the whole study was using this population of Puerto Ricans in the area and having them eat yogurt and seeing how it affected their like health markers overall through their stools. Not a single one of them would eat the yogurt because they're Puerto Rican and they hate dairy.
That is so funny. I was just about to say, I know Marcos said that for a second, but Marcos is Puerto Rican.
He's probably like, I hate yogurt.
No, I love dairy, like, but it's like I don't go out of my way for like milk. I'll do yogurt because like, again, milk seems to upset the stomach, and it's being in tune with those things. Like we're talking about in general with like gut health is like, okay, like why am I going to put something inside me that does like, again, it has like an immediate response to it. Like you just said, they're like, no. And it's not typically a part of trying to think the cuisine at all. Well, I mean, yeah, you're on an island.
No, it's just rice and beans.
Primarily, yeah. There's a lot.
Plantains?
Rice and beans.
Some plantains?
Yeah, plantains, rice and beans. But that's all about like being honestly a good coach too, because you have to understand and be receptive to different like halal standards or, like the holidays and stuff, and you'll navigate that.
I have a ton of Muslim clients that have coming up, and I have to create them plans around Ramadan. And I've had like CrossFit type athletes that I have to have Ramadan around, or like physique people that had to have Ramadan that's coming up when this episode comes out. I got clients in Japan. I'm like, what are you eating in Japan? Like, I don't know. Like, tell me about that. And, or I have clients in like Spain, Italy. And I'm like, I live in California. I live in LA. Like, I could eat whatever I want, but the cuisine where you're at is different. So I think as a coach, you have to realize like, yeah, food is very much to the culture, to the environment.
Yeah. Culture. We mean, Seamus has a blend of cultures. I have a blend of cultures with Puerto Rican, Italian, Seamus with Filipino and Irish. And then Dasha, what about you? I mean, is there,
Russian.
I was like, the little tinge of Russian in there, but Russia's so big too, right? Is it like Russia, or is it like pockets of like Russia, like up, like high up?
Oh yeah, my dad's from Siberia, like up way north.
Oh, okay.
So is this why you were a dancer?
Maybe. No, I was a dancer because my mom was a gymnast, and so she was actually like a world renowned gymnast traveling with Kazakhstan and Russia like when she was younger, and she almost died because she like snapped her neck a little bit, and so she was like, you're never going to be a gymnast, but you can dance. And so I had to dance.
Adjunct
Ballet?
Yeah, I did it all. Dance team captain in high school. Like, I just had fun with it.
Got
so
it.
cool.
Okay. Well, yeah. So culture, obviously, and I think one of our early on episodes, we talked about like culture and influencing nutrition choices. And then also, like you said, starting with the kids and how that upbringing and things that, again, I've had this question thrown out to a couple of clients, and it kind of hurts feelings at times, but I think it's a fair thing. Well, what do your parents and family look like? I asked that question when it comes to like the cuisine that they were eating that they may assume is like healthy, because your parents are feeding you. They're going to feed you what's quote unquote healthy. Or are they just getting fed propaganda over the years? Or was that all they could afford? Right. And like that type of like questioning or thinking and open-endedness of it, usually again, it gives a visceral response. So if you talk to people when for role playing, God almighty, I literally got like eviscerated by the people because I asked that question in a role playing scenario in a class. And I was like, but I mean, like, honestly though, like what are the people around that you're like? Are you being influenced by those people in a sense? And like, do they look the way that you want to look? If it's not, then obviously like don't do what they're doing. Like it seems pretty logical, you know? But again, that like upbringing, it starts when you're young. I'm interested to see what my kids think about food and what they view as healthy, because I'm just trying to support them on a diet I think is as healthy as possible given the confines of what they'll eat. You know, they eat a lot of really lean white meat. God forbid you give them a chicken thigh versus a breast, basically, right? Like, all right, whatever. I mean, I'd love for them to eat eggs. They don't like it yet. My son has taken one bite of like sushi in his life. My daughter eats sardines like it's going out of style. Like, so it's just like, it's such a interesting thing. And the pantry you have at home definitely dictates, that kind of culture, right? Hell, I mean, I grew up having pasta like 3 days a week, and now it's like maybe once a month. It's crazy to see the shift if you're willing to educate yourself for sure. But I do have a question, Dasha, because I know we've talked kind of like open-ended about a lot of stuff really quick. You brought up this idea of like AI with gut stuff. So like, it sounds like the consumption of that for people that, I mean, I think for me, like super interested in that because again, I'm not a specialist, but I'd like to like go to a place where like that thing has been trained almost extensively on things related to like gut, and again, maybe even helps me decipher my own Dutch test. Granted, I feel like someone going over that versus a computer would be far nicer. But like, I'm interested to hear like what that is. And then also if we can maybe touch on like a Dutch test or which one you'd like to utilize more for yourself and people.
Cool, for sure. So I think what you were talking about was the recent Core Coaches launch that we had. So just like you guys were talking about, we live in a world where within your scope of practice, and what my goal is with Core Coaches is to create the next superheroes in the healthcare industry, where you are acting as the liaison between the patient and the doctor, where, have you ever gotten an ear infection? This is super specific, but have you ever gotten an ear infection and you're like, I know I need antibiotics, but now I need to call the doctor the next day, go to the doctor, have him look in my ear, say, I think you have an ear infection. And you're like, I know, but I need that prescription. So I need you to go and sign it. So then you get it. And now it's like 6 p.m. that doctor's day, and you're standing in line at CVS, and there's a huge line, and you're like, what the hell? If I had just picked up my phone, called a core coach, and has started something natural the morning of, I bet you I wouldn't even need to take these antibiotics right now. I'm standing in CVS for an hour, and there's probably 1,000 natural remedies in here right now that could make me feel better. And that's what I want to create, is that liaison between your doctor and you, so that you have more control over your life. So we've created this AI-backed certification model where we'll train coaches how to read and interpret the GI map, do all the stool testing, learn everything about SIBO, parasites, candida, all the things. Then they graduate into hormone health. So learning, like you said, the Dutch test versus blood work versus saliva, you're great because you know that there's different tests for hormones. And the actual efficacy and which one you choose to do will depend on the marker that you're studying. So we teach the coaches how to choose the best test for their patient, given what income or insight they have. And then on the last step is basically an advanced programming. So you take someone who has low testosterone and SIBO and this, how do I change their programming in their exercise to be more creatine based versus oxygen sparing or something like that, to create less oxidative stress, to put less stress on the system, to then have them be able to progress and recover faster. So we've created this 3-step model where you're basically taking the skill sets of a doctor, the skill sets of a dietitian, and the skill sets of the personal trainer all in one. And we built this all behind, we uploaded all this course material behind an AI engine. And so now, as you're going through the certification, you can upload the Dutch test and it'll double check your work. It'll provide you with, hey, I think you missed this. And now you're becoming a stronger coach as you're applying it, and you can learn faster. Because for the first time ever, we're at a really cool place where it's free. Google is free. ChatGPT is free. Anyone can do this stuff. But who can do it the fastest? Who can learn the fastest? That's what our next kind of, I think 2025 is going to be about, is who's going to learn to utilize these AI engines the fastest.
Speaking to that, which would you guys build it on? Like, is it Claude? Is it GPT? Is it Grok? Did you use a particular AI model to like feed in the information to do the back end?
The backend, we've used a few different models of ChatGPT to find the one that works best for us. But we just used Open AI to build it in the backend.
Yeah. The only reason why I asked
Feed it a lot of you feed it a lot of studies, feed it a lot of books, feed it a lot of like day-to-day PubMed stuff or whatever is
We
coming
had
out.
it all already built out in our certifications. So we just build out the back end with all of our certifications and everything. It has the protocols that I've spent years putting together anyways. Like, I know this has 500 pages of literature resources. Like,
Here you
let's just
go.
upload it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. That's funny. That's exactly like, I just created a big presentation on this with our CEO yesterday, and now we're finally formalizing. So the platform we're using is Longevity AI. We're going to get the person on this podcast, and it's more longevity stuff. And it's like they're going beyond the Framingham score. They're going beyond your VO2 max, DEXA scan. Like, they're putting it all together, but they're feeding it every single day with evidence-based approach. And it's like data is getting bigger, evidence is coming faster, and you're exactly right. We cannot have, like, some of the technology that we have that Marcus and I are working on, we're like 7 to 12 to 15 years old. It's like, how do you put data on something that is as archaic as 7 years ago? Like, it's just like, it just needs to be, malleable. You need a system that is malleable as you go, not something that's stuck in 2018. You need it to be today and forward.
Well, you know what's funny though is that I actually had this AI engineer actually come in for a DEXA scan like last week, Seamus, and he was like fascinated. He's like, actually, AI actually works really well with old systems and legacy systems, obviously, because they don't change anymore. So it's harder to parse information as it's constantly being dynamic. But if it's kind of stuck in the past, it's actually really easy for that model to like learn it and be really good at it. So yeah, like the inclusion of our old stuff is actually like where it's going to learn a lot very quickly. Yeah. But then, like, you know, again, my favorite explanation right now is like, we have a new DEXA scan, Dasha, in a few of our offices. And to explain to people that, like, hey, the new algorithm and the new way that this scan is reading, there's going to be a discrepancy between old you in your visceral tissue, if it did that, or your whatever other tissue you have, right? And then one now, it's not that you actually physically change. It's just like there's a new set point, and then it's going to change relative to that new set point. And people, they lose their ever-loving minds when they're like, I'm fatter. It's like, no, this is just your new fat set point, and we'll see how it shifts and change. Like I know that you've seen great progress, but
do you guys offer your free like new set point standard? I feel like that should be a discount for the patients because it's useless data.
It kind of is like a baseline. It's a new baseline.
It's definitely. Well, again, our patients, they can come in and do scans as often as they want, right? Sometimes the limitation is geographical, so they don't have access to our center at that time unless they live closer. But that's also why, like, for my Vegas clinic, we've been using the same machine for decades, 2 decades. So intentionally, and it's like hard to like, oh, like, well, there's newer models that scans a little bit faster and that you can get a core scan. And like the person I had as a patient brand new yesterday, I told him, I was like, hey, we've had this machine for a while. Like some of the newer ones have some stuff. If you're interested in that, like we can go look at that set point too, and he appreciated the explanation I had because like, I know my job is to be, like you just said, that liaison of like, hey, older technology, it has its place, especially for people that have been here for decades, right? The newer technology, it has its place, and it might be a little bit better for helping you understand and extract information about, again, like visceral areas and how much organ tissue fat you might have. But again, like here's the number that I've learned about that's like comparing this specific region of android fat versus just total body. And if this is sub 10, chances are you're not really seeing a whole lot of accumulation of that. And he was like kind of blown away. It's like, oh, you really like this stuff, don't you? He was like, well, it's my job to like be really informed of like the pros and cons, the drawbacks. And also I consider myself a little bit of a data scientist nerd. We've changed our VO2 systems. So I have old VO2s from old one and new one, and I've guinea pigged it, and everybody usually hates that test. And I was like, look, literally the aerobic threshold, the 0.85 RER on both these machines for me, my heart rate did not change. Crazy enough. Like, and so like, again, the way that it's calibrated to look at oxygen, and the guy was like, yeah, you are a nerd, like in a good way. You're my kind of nerd. And I was like, I appreciate that, man. But you're right. That would be a great point. Hey, the funny thing though is that like the upgraded system or software does a recalibration of old, so you can get if it was the same system but newer hardware and software, it will do a reanalyzation. So yes, here's where it would have been, so you don't have to even come back and do a new base point scan. But then go explain that to people, and they again like they're like, I was 18%. It's like, yeah, like you were, but like again, you're still in that healthy range that we've deemed, and it's been. I mean, data, AI, all this stuff, like Seamus is talking about with like being able to explain that or how it may have changed with something new, or for you, like taking this massive amount of like passion project literature, 500 pages, and being able to check yourself against that, especially if like me, the practitioner, I would find that incredibly valuable because like I would love to dive deeper into those things. But like my problem would be is that like their frequency of doing it would not be high enough for me to remember that unless I go back to a system to ask it questions. Hey, I'm thinking this. What do you think? You've looked at 1,000+ tests and I've looked at one. Like invaluable.
Yeah.
Like that's super cool. Like, and I think any practitioner or someone that
would love that intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, again, like you have to keep learning. Okay, cool. I'm on the right track. At least I can try to get them to that next thing. What's the logical step? And then also I'm sure your team, it will field questions if I were to ask like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is what the system said. Can you just double, like, I want like the human set of eyes in addition to the AI. And eventually you get more confident with the AI actually giving you the answer.
Yeah, we have weekly case study reviews. So you can submit, like if you have a patient right now going through gut or hormone or exercise questions, so you can submit them weekly and we address them as you're going through the certification. But we also built it out because as we talked about and looping back to the very beginning of this conversation, everyone who goes through their own struggle becomes really passionate about helping other people with that struggle. So I've had a lot of our own clients learn how to read GI maps, learn how to read Dutch tests, learn how to do this. And that's why the system works so well, because it can be adapted to any level of intelligence. I have RDs who go through it. I have, clients who go through it. But the cool thing about the AI is just the ability to speed up your learning and speed up the imposter syndrome, which is the number one crutch.
Yeah.
And like being able to ask a question on a group call. Yeah, sure. But I've done 7 of these cohorts.
Yeah.
No one wants to be the one to ask a question, especially if you don't, no matter what. So being able to have the AI engine is just like, great.
It helps a lot.
Yeah.
No, for example, I'm going to give an example here, and maybe we'll kind of stop here because it's been an hour, Dasha. I really appreciate your time. But like, I had gotten fielded a question around 3 protein shakes that are plant-based. Ladies a little like concerned around microplastics, toxins, and cancer risk, and I had to like go on Consensus AI, which is like, I believe Lane Norton's like a chief scientific officer on or sits on the board, and I had to go get a few studies, feed it into my platform, and like read out those studies, and then help me create an email around like, all right, well, talking about the minerals and issues that you're having with, this is what you're talking about, but these are the studies that say, hey, it's been great, and these are what the company policies are, and they're third party tested. And they're like, oh, thank you so much for helping me alleviate my concerns. And I'm like, I would not know how to do that. Like, I'd have to do all that research myself and like spend hours looking at aggregating data. I'm like, I need something to just make my life easy.
But also like validate that you don't need to be an expert, but also kudos to you because you're using the best strategies possible to become that expert and really just provide them with data. And at the end of the day, coaches are, like I said, liaisons. You don't have to have a medical degree to summarize what Google said. You just had to know what Google said. Like at the end of the day, I'm not diagnosing anyone with anything. I'm not treating anyone with anything. Yeah. I'm practicing in my practice as a coach.
Like a holistic approach and just giving the evidence as it states, and here's what you can do. Dasha, no, thank you so much. We're at an hour. Marcos, maybe if my questions are great, I'm done. If you have any other questions, Marcos, or if you want, we could just wrap it up just to make sure we're privy for Dasha's time.
I know. Hours never enough, man. I feel like it's
especially with this topic, damn it.
Yeah.
You can always do another one. If you guys like this, let them know, leave a review and tell us that you liked it, and I'll come back and I'll do a second one.
Yeah, that way we can be more concise to like maybe a particular test. Cause I mean, honestly, like my predecessor was like really diving deep into Dutch tests years back. And then I feel like that was like a next evolution of something. And I know a few other coaches I've seen in the nutrition space, like really, singing its praises of understanding things. So, I mean, I'd love that or other ones that you see they most commonly do potentially. So that's like very kind of niched and specific and kind of a little bit of a podcast masterclass version of it. I think that'd be really cool. But I mean, other questions.
I have a freebie with the top 10 gut questions that I get every single whatever throughout. I can give that link to you guys if you want to share it. And then I also have one that has 50 plus ways to optimize your gut and hormone health. That's more of like a workshop style. So y'all can dive deeper.
Yeah, we'll put that in.
We'll put that in. Like they're just like straight up HTML links to the website.
Yeah, PDF and a Loom video if you guys want.
Yes, let's get that so we can include that for people if the idea of gut health got them jazzed and like they didn't really dive into the details of it. It's like sometimes it's good just to like have some banter and some fun. But no, appreciate your time. Obviously, it's obvious to see that your passion as it comes from like gut health and understanding that, and I mean, going through the trouble of building like a back end to be able to help facilitate people getting better at it. Like you said, not feeling like their imposter syndrome is setting in. That's a huge thing. And I think you're right. Like 2025 really is a matter of like how quickly can anybody kind of help with giving somebody some sort of information that might steer them down the right path. And like you just said, and being that your own health advocate in a sense. And we're big on that. We always empower, patients, clients alike to be able to figure out like the details of their health. And I mean, I can honestly say that like, if it wasn't for my mom doing that advocating for herself, I don't know if she'd be here. She had breast cancer about 20 years ago. And she's like, I remember to this day, I'm like 11 years old. And she goes, can you grow cancer overnight? Because she had just had a mammogram and everything was fine. And then she like a month later, she felt like a lump. You know what I mean? So, just because you get like the green light and you think you're fine, like you got to question stuff, especially if you know in your heart that something is off. So, yeah. That's it for me.
Well, Dasha, can you share with the folks where they can find you? Anything else you're excited for? If you have like anything on the date that's coming out, this pod probably be out in 2 to 3 weeks. So if there's something there, just share that, and more people can find you.
Absolutely. So you can find me at Dasha Fitness. I'll send over a couple links for you guys. You're more than welcome to DM me. I'm every day in my DMs. That is me. You can ask me any questions you have. I have so many free trainings. Please reach out and just ask me whatever question you have. And I promise you, I will give you a free resource around it and try and help you navigate it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, you heard it there, guys. Go deep dive on the gut health. Dasha, thank you so much for your time. I know the Macropod would love it. We'll definitely do a round two sometime soon. All right, guys, Macropod peeps, we're out.